Holcomb calls out gubernatorial candidates, Gaming Commission funding changes, plus Todd Rokita's COVID report, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending March 29th, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
This week, Governor Eric Holcomb says he wants to hear more detail on issues from the candidates hoping to replace him. Holcomb is term limited from another 4 years as governor, and this year's campaign features 6 Republican candidates. And the current GOP office holder says people are telling him they're undecided because they don't know where those candidates stand on the kinds of issues governors face on a day-in, day-out basis.
We can repeat words, and most of those words I see broad agreement within the candidates.
Holcomb says issues he wants to hear more on include community and economic development, infrastructure, mental health care, broadband access, and the future of the Medicaid program.
What are the ideas, the new ideas, the next bold, as I've heard many of them say, these are bold ideas. I want to see not just the vision, very important to have a vision, more so to have the mission, the plans, to actually realize that vision.
Holcomb says he hasn't decided who to endorse, but will do so in short order. Are you surprised at Holcomb's call-out? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann Delaney. Republican Mike O'Brien. John Schwannis, host of Indiana Lawmakers. And Leslie Bonilla-Muniz, reporter for the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Mike O'Brien, did you see this coming from Eric Holcomb?
I think it's natural at this point in the governorship for the guy who's in to look at the next group and you kind of get in legacy mode and you're trying to give advice to the next crowd. I think fairly, if you just look at the 30-second ad spots that are all about things that governors have very little to do with, immigration, a humanitarian crisis in Central America, things that like
the governor of Indiana is not going to have
that poll really well, and you have no ability to impact. Yeah. Then the criticism is fair. I think if you watch the debates this week, though, if I'm Suzanne Crouch talking about mental health, if I'm Eric Doden talking about small town redevelopment, and he's put out comprehensive plans, if you're Brad Chambers talking about economic development policy and strategy, I think it's a little unfair. I think they are starting to build some more detail around what they're going to do. That's hard to fit into a 30-second TV ad, but if you watch the debates this week, they were all about governance and state government. Yeah. You're not going to you're not going to outmaneuver Suzanne Crouch in a conversation about how state government works. She's been in office for a long time and embraced that this week when they talked about
who's the outsider,
who could be the outsider, and she's like I don't know how anybody can call themselves an outsider in this group, and she embraced it, and that was great. But so again, I think and Braun talks about his experience in building a company and how he'll pivot and bring that to state government too. So I think I think on one hand it was kind of reflective for Governor Holcomb. And aspirational, but on the other hand, I think these candidates are starting to talk about what they're actually going to do.
Do you think that's true, or are we starting to get some more details?
When you're in a debate, you're being questioned by a panel, okay, and you've got to be somewhat responsive, especially if the panel is willing to say you didn't answer the question.
And I will say on the Fox 59 CBS 4 debate, they really held those.
But they didn't talk about
account.
Education on the Fox 59 Sports, which is half the state budget. But in any event, when they're forced in that situation, they talk about it. The ads they're putting on aren't about Indiana. They aren't about Indiana issues. They're about who can stir up hate the most, who can say, I hate Joe Biden more than the other person. And it is really pretty shameful when you think about it, because it has nothing to do, it's not even tangentially involved with the governor's race, although Holcomb did send National Guard down to Texas, which is, again,
it's ridiculous. The state is impacted by it, but you're impacted by illegal immigration.
Well, it's been in a
which
positive
you're not
way.
Going to affect as governor of Indiana.
But you've got immigrants coming to Indiana and taking and filling jobs that need to be filled and bringing industry here. It's a positive impact. It isn't the kind of inhumane references like Trump makes, saying that they're not human.
I think that's the old. I think that's the old line. They're coming to work at the meatpacking plant. That's immigration.
That's what's happening.
I've
That's
that,
happening in Seymour, Indiana.
I've heard that a little bit from gubernatorial candidates this week.
Right. It is happening.
And that's always been the case, and that continues to be true. But not when you're pulling 300,000 people a month through the border, and you have humanitarian crises from collapsing governments in Central America.
The only one who had
this is not about opportunities.
The
about
only
survival.
one who had an impact
I think we're on the same page on this, actually. But
well, the only one who had an impact, or could have had an impact on that, was Mike Braun, and he didn't have the courage to do what Todd Young did, to vote for the bipartisan bill to help solve the border crisis.
I'll say was something pointed out by multiple opponents of Mike Braun in this race, is that you're talking about immigration and you have done nothing.
He wants to demagogue the issue. That's all he wants to do. He doesn't want to solve it.
I want to ask a little bit about Eric Holcomb again, because this was, I think, a little surprising in that he's never really this, provocative, maybe a little strong about his comments, but even as far as he went in the op-ed and then the comments he made to reporters in recent weeks, he never really goes that far in kind of pushing people to do something. Were you surprised to hear the level of specificity and detailing exactly which issues he's sort of demanding to hear more from?
I was a little bit surprised, but I also think that since then things have changed a little bit. We've obviously had the debates. My publication has put out 2 out of 4 of these. Honestly, they're pretty lengthy, in-depth policy Q&As. People are starting to ask them the questions, and I think it makes sense because we're getting closer to the elections. But so I think, we as the media are trying to do our part too. The candidates are mostly doing their part. They're answering our questions generally, but I was surprised. So I'm interested in seeing if he thinks that's been fulfilled. Was
this a little bit, because we are starting to see more, Eric Doden's been putting out policy plans for, I think, like 2 years, to be fair to Eric Doden. And Brad Chambers, since he's gotten into the race in the last few weeks, has started to ramp those up. We've seen a little bit from Curtis Hill. We've seen one big policy proposal from Suzanne Crouch, nothing really from Mike Braun, who's actually refusing to put out detailed policy until after the primary. And then Jamie Rittenauer, as she's getting more attention, is talking about specific things. Was this a way for Eric Holcomb to stall on having to make an endorsement in this race, which it seems increasingly like he doesn't want to do before the primary?
You could draw that conclusion, perhaps. The longer you wait, the less value an endorsement has. So you could argue that if it doesn't come yesterday, will it really matter?
Yeah.
And if you wanted to follow conventional wisdom, the easy out would have been to go with his lieutenant governor, who was part of his administration and arguably his business partner in the governance of the state of Indiana. And he opted not to do that.
Listening to Suzanne Crouch talk for the last few weeks, there might be a reason he didn't endorse her right away.
And he's been trying to stay above the fray, but keep in mind, he hasn't had AI chips implanted yet. He is a human, and I'm sure it's not pleasant to hear these people sounding this theme that, without explicitly saying the guy who's in there now is an incompetent. One of the ads actually comes pretty closely. You can't bring about change if you don't change the person in charge, or something to that effect. So human nature would suggest, hey, I actually was trying to govern and deal with some serious issues. If Ann used to knock him for not being,
aggressive enough,
but it was always about, let's get the computer systems up to the 20. Now that we're in the 21st century, let's get them up to the 20th century at least, and about roads and infrastructure and quality of life issues. And so I think it is natural for him to want people to address those. But I think there's 2 different issues. I don't think necessarily his endorsement hinges on what he hears these people. As a practical matter, he's a student of politics. He knows he knows these. And frankly, it's a sad commentary on our state or the state of politics if now, only now, and I know we don't traditionally pay attention till Labor Day and the general election, or maybe a week before the primary, as is the case here, but we should know more. People, and certainly they're somewhat disingenuous. The governor knows where these people are.
He may feel that his endorsement will doom his choice, too.
Well, speaking of that, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question, and this week's question is, would an endorsement from Governor Eric Holcomb help or hurt Republican gubernatorial candidates? A, help them, or B, hurt them? Last week, we asked you whether gubernatorial candidates should be excluded from the debates based on polling or fundraising numbers. Just 23% of you say yes, 77% say no. The Indiana Debate Commission debate, which will come in late April, has all 6 Republican candidates. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Indiana gaming officials seem to be largely dismissing concerns about a new law that will fundamentally shift the way gaming enforcement is funded, but Democrats say the shift will choke off and defund the state gaming police. Previously, the Indiana Gaming Commission could use fines and penalties it collected from casinos to fund its enforcement actions. Not anymore. Rather, lawmakers sent more state budget dollars to the agency. But they also blocked the executive branch from shifting money to the Gaming Commission if it needs more funding for enforcement. Instead, the commission must get approval from legislators on the state budget committee. Democratic Representative Matt Pierce says that's asking for trouble and undermining public confidence in gaming enforcement.
And for what? What has gone wrong? What problem is being solved? What public policy is being advanced? Apparently, we just think the Gaming Commission's been too hard on the gaming operators. They've been too mean to them.
Republican Representative Ben Smaltz says the change is simply providing a little more oversight when gaming enforcement requires more money.
Wouldn't we, as the policymakers that make the rules for the casino industry and the gaming industry, wouldn't we want to know that?
The funding change comes after 3 former Republican state lawmakers have pleaded guilty to federal crimes in recent years related to a casino operator barred from the industry by the Gaming Commission. And Delaney, is this change being a little overblown?
I don't think so. I mean, we've had 3 legislators be involved in federal investigations and prosecutions related to our gaming industry. And the gaming officials have cooperated, obviously, with those federal agencies. And that in itself means the system is working, okay? And here what you're doing is you're taking away the fines and all that had funded those investigations before, and you're making the...
Well, they're not taking away fines. They're redirecting where the fines go.
They don't go anymore to the Gaming Commission to do their
it's
investigations.
It's not like we're not going to fine gaming operators.
No, but you're not going to allow that money to fund those investigations. That's number one. Number two, when you need more, and they're only guessing at what's needed at the moment, you have to go to a group of 4, one senator of whom is an apologist for the gaming industry. If we did this to the state police, if we said you need to, if you want to augment your budget because you're investigating public corruption in the legislature, but you got to go to these 4 guys, and they'll tell you whether or not you can have the money, when would that happen? Well, I guess maybe under the supermajority it might happen. But the point is, you're tying the hands of an agency which has shown that with cooperation with the federal government, it can root out corruption in an industry which, frankly, nationwide has had its problems. And we're saying, no, you've been too effective. We don't like that.
I want to say nationwide you hear a lot about gaming corruption, but in Indiana you really don't. There is this one operator who's now barred from the industry who led to these 3 prosecutions, and we've heard the rumors, is there more coming related to that operator, but we haven't seen anything yet. Isn't that a testament to the fact that things are working? Why would you want to change it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it did work. I think when they did single out that operator, discovered what was going on there. That's clearly that's the message from the industry side. It's like, no, we're policed, and it worked this time. And so, like, don't come down harder on us. Don't come down harder on the operators that are operating lawfully.
Yeah.
When we have this regulator that is clearly effectively policed out the guys that weren't doing the right thing. Now, I think on the back end of that kind of experience, when you do have legislators involved and in this circumstance, which isn't done yet, by the way. I mean, we're still waiting on sentencing. It keeps getting pushed. Nobody really knows why. Is there more coming? I don't think it's unreasonable for the legislature on the back end to go, all right, hey, let's take a look at that experience, and did we get it right? Are we regulating this as effectively as we can? Should they have to come to the legislature when there's increased activity and increased cost, and they have to ask for money? We kind of want to know why that is. We want a line of sight on that. That's totally fair. I think the timing was probably the issue here.
Yeah,
But
I'm
I don't
not
think it's
sure that's
unreasonable on the
goal.
back end to look at how it's being regulated and
That's not
ask
the goal.
questions
The
about
goal
it.
is to say we can put the stop to it. We can make sure that it
Also,
doesn't
Matt
go
Pierce
any
thinks.
further.
That's what Matt Pierce
I'll
thinks.
say this. This is
Well,
part
that's
of a,
true.
This is part of a larger
It'd
effort.
be the first time.
This is part of a larger effort in the General Assembly among Republicans, and particularly Republicans like Chris Garten, who's been leading the charge on issues like this of, we don't like how state agencies are policing Hoosier citizens and, more importantly, Hoosier businesses.
Under our command.
Yeah, under
They've
Republican
had control for
under
20 years.
And they aren't happy. And so in the last few sessions, we've seen a dramatic overhaul of how state agencies can make rules and impose fines and penalties and fees and things like that. I think, I could imagine the average Hoosier going, yeah, I don't want the government in my business if I'm just trying to do a renovation to this plot of land that I have, because that's where a lot of this sort of started from with environmental regulations. But who out there is going, boy, casinos, that's who we need to stand up for?
There's a certain.
Well, he authored the bill. There you go. And you've got Garten.
You're exactly right. Had you not even framed the question that way, that's the point I was going to make. This is part of an ongoing trend. We've seen it with the Alcoholic Beverage Commission. We've seen it with the Department of Environmental Management. We've seen it with now the Gaming Commission. It's this notion, there's a bit of hubris here, it seems, that nobody can make decisions as well as we can make decisions. Never mind that in some of these areas you have an expertise and a specialization that, frankly, very few members of the General Assembly possess. And in fact, that's why, I mean, if you take this to its logical extreme, why have state agencies at all if they're always second-guessed, if they have to ask for permission at every step in the process? And it seems to me to be an institutional infighting where you do have one branch of government saying, we don't like the executive branch of government, even though most of these people were appointed by and answer to Republicans. So, but it just goes beyond. I think it's even the notion of R versus D. It's the notion of we want the buck to stop here. And like I said before, the logistics of this don't work eventually unless you move away from a part-time legislature. And now, granted, the budget committee, the argument here would be, and
they meet regularly.
Yeah. That's not the full chamber, but if this drumbeat continues to sound, and if this move toward we'll make all the final decisions, that's going to be too much even for the state budget committee. Eventually, you're going to have to put more on the plate of lawmakers on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, that's unavoidable if this trend continues.
Something else that was brought up specifically with this Gaming Commission move is before session, in the very immediate wake of the latest guilty plea involving a former state lawmaker and federal corruption charges, we had both Rod Bray and Todd Huston saying absolutely no gaming legislation in 2024, and even in the foreseeable future, it's going to put some doubt on that because there are all these questions about entanglement between the casino operators and lawmakers. Doesn't this fly in the face of those comments?
You know, I think because it is part of that larger trend, that's probably how it was reasoned out of, this is just part of a crackdown on making sure that we can have these agencies, held in line. But it is still unique because the Gaming Commission was the only agency that was singled out in this way. But it also didn't come out of the blue. I mean, at that there's an interim committee meeting, and Senator Chris Garten was very clear. He rebuked the Gaming Commission for what he saw as being too harsh on the casinos, is a little vague exactly what, but he told them very clearly that he would lead the charge on any legislative action, and he definitely saw that through this session. So it also did not come out of left field.
If anything, this is going to get harder to police because we were one of the first 5-10 states to have, for instance, legalized sports gaming. Yep. Now we were in the vanguard of that movement, and now it's, I think, more than 50% of the states. And I'm guessing en route to becoming 2/3 or more. And so gaming is more of an interstate proposition and an enterprise than it was even before, when you had essentially Indiana-based entities or Indiana-based subsidiaries of larger gaming companies operating here. It seems to me it's hard to police things when when you're crossing borders.
Yes, although,
potentially.
I mean, the way that the state law has been set up, it still does require that. It still does require through everybody who's in Indiana.
But
so
it's sort of like dealing with offshore illegal activity. How do you, it's one thing to put it in law, but how do you really
And the question is, does this make corruption more likely or not? And the answer is it does make it more likely.
All right. Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita, Ann's favorite person, presented a report at a political rally this week that he says proves the state used faulty data to justify the stay-at-home order at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports experts warn that Rokita's claims lack context.
The report focuses on what Rokita claims are inaccurate COVID death counts and positivity rates, and how they were used to inform public policy decisions. The Regenstrief Institute worked with public health and healthcare agencies to gather and communicate data in the early days of the pandemic. Brian Dixon is the director of public health informatics at Regenstrief. He says there were in-depth discussions around those public policy decisions and what data should be considered.
We're looking at patterns of data and whether rates are increasing or decreasing when we're trying to make decisions. And those decisions are being made looking at multiple indicators, not just a single thing.
Dixon says data can be messy, but Rokita's report doesn't paint a complete picture of the data or how it was used.
Leslie, how should Hoosiers view this report from Todd Rokita's office?
I think there's multiple ways to review it. I think that first, you can take it at its face. He believes this, and he's, attempting to correct the record. There's probably a lot of people that agree with him and think that the pandemic was overblown, just as though there's probably a lot of people who wish that the state had taken it more seriously. But I think bigger than that is the political element. He's scoring some political points off this with a base that is really skeptical of those restrictions. While Governor Eric Holcomb is still dealing with, the fallout from these restrictions. Not only was this report out there, but, his own lieutenant governor was on stage at 2 debates this week saying that, this would never happen under her watch. So there's that. And then I think that there's also a health element to it because so many people lost faith in health experts during the pandemic, and it goes all the way up to our state health commissioner. So it's just something that they'll have to reckon with. And it probably also wasn't helped that they, IDOH did not respond to requests to comments. They did not attempt to, refute the claims that he's making. So it's also not entirely clear how right or how wrong he was in making the report. But regardless, even if some of the numbers, are wrong, tens of thousands of Hoosiers were still killed by the virus, and I don't think that we should ignore that.
I want to ask about the impact. One of the things that this report does, it doesn't just say, oh, those numbers were wrong, which he's not saying it the way. Were all of the numbers exactly correct? Absolutely not, because we learned more as the thing went on. But he also is claiming that the state used numbers the way the state did not use numbers. So moving beyond that, though, one of the things this report says is, that huge historic public health funding increase that the legislature did a year ago, we should take some of that money and move it towards basically what I'm saying, which is, well, let's dig more into these numbers, say they were all wrong, and then come up with a plan for the future so we can never have a lockdown order again.
He's an attorney general that doesn't have any respect for what his role is, okay? He doesn't respect the law or the justices of the Supreme Court, and now he wants to be the chief statistician for the state of Indiana. It's ridiculous, okay? This is 4 years ago, and we have a health crisis in this state. Just look at all of the numbers, or maybe they're wrong too, about obesity and smoking and all the other things, because, who knows? He is using the office purely for political gain. That's all, okay? He doesn't do the function of the Attorney General, but he's running for the next office. I just hope that he wasn't using state money doing this analysis, okay?
I'm pretty sure he did. But
well, he shouldn't be, because, I put my faith in Regenstrief before I'd put it in Todd Rokita, who we know lies.
I want to say, what he's asking, there's clearly still, to Leslie's point, there's still a vocal group of people, maybe they're not a large group of people, but a vocal group of people, particularly in the Republican Party in this state.
Particularly
in the Republican Party in this state, who say, well, they're not all Republicans, some of them are also libertarians.
Oh, well, there you go.
But
okay.
who agree 100% with and are still angry about the COVID-19 lockdown.
4 years later.
Does this dissipate and disappear after Eric Holcomb is no longer the governor?
It could, but look, I mean, it is important for so many reasons to look back at how COVID was handled
Absolutely.
and say, what did we get right, what did we get wrong? Now, in the moment, on March 20th, of 2021,
2020.
you're sitting there and a virus is just like coming towards you, and you don't know how to test for it. You don't have a vaccine for it. You don't know anything, and so you
didn't even know how it was communicated.
So you're building rules around it. You're trying to manage your local population. You're trying to keep people safe the best way you know how to in this unprecedented thing. And then 4 years later, you look back and go, you got that wrong. It's like, well, probably.
Yeah.
So let's figure out like how we got it wrong and get it right then, and to get it right the next time. So in that part, I agree with Todd Rokita. This report is intended to fan the flames of those thousands of Hoosiers that are still angry that we got it wrong.
And still think the earth is flat, too.
Finally, we end the show for the second week in a row, unfortunately, on a sad note. This week, our condolences go out to the family of Fort Wayne Mayor Tom Henry, who died Thursday after announcing in recent weeks a diagnosis of late-stage stomach cancer. Henry served in city government for more than 4 decades, including more than 16 years as mayor. And that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Ann Delaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwannis of Indiana Lawmakers, and Leslie Bonilla-Muniz of the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.